My mother-in-law told everyone I trapped her son with a baby. That sentence still feels unreal every time I think about it. Because before all of this happened, I genuinely believed I was doing everything right. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't manipulative. I wasn't desperate. I was just a woman who fell in love with a man whose mother never thought I deserved him. From the very first time I met Pette, I felt it. She smiled, but her eyes never softened. She hugged me, but it felt like obligation instead of warmth. At family dinners, she asked questions about my job in a way that sounded polite on the surface but always carried an edge. She'd say things like, "Oh, that's interesting," in a tone that suggested it really wasn't. She'd comment on how small my apartment was, how competitive the job market must be for someone in my field, how some women she knew were already homeowners by my age. She never said I wasn't good enough. She didn't have to. The message was always there, hanging between us like something unspoken but heavy. Arlo noticed it long before I admitted it to myself. Whenever his mother crossed a line, he stepped in. He'd tell her calmly but firmly that her comments were unnecessary. He'd remind her that I was his partner, not a phase. Pette would immediately apologize, put her hand on his arm, and say she didn't mean anything by it. She promised she'd do better. And for a while she would. Then slowly, almost invisibly, the comments would start again. I learned to ignore them because I loved Arlo, and loving him meant accepting that his mother was part of the package. I honestly believed marriage would change things. I thought once we were officially family, she'd stop treating me like a temporary mistake her son would eventually correct. Instead, marriage seemed to harden her opinion. It was no longer just a relationship she disapproved of. It was a permanent decision she wanted undone. Her smile stayed polite, but her disappointment became harder to hide. I started feeling like I was constantly being evaluated, like I was on probation in my own family. 2 years into our marriage, everything shifted. I found out I was pregnant on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I remember staring at the test in disbelief before my hands started shaking. When I showed Arlo, he cried. Not a quiet tear or two, but full, overwhelmed sobs. He hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe and kept saying, "We're going to be parents." He told everyone he knew within days. He started planning the nursery immediately. Watching his excitement made me feel safe. It made me feel chosen. When we announced the pregnancy at a family dinner, I expected mixed reactions, but I wasn't prepared for Pette's response. She didn't smile. She didn't congratulate us. She just looked at me and asked how far along I was. When I said 8 weeks, she nodded slowly and counted backward on her fingers. The room went quiet. Then she said the timing was awfully convenient. Arlo asked her what she meant, and she brushed it off like it was nothing, changing the subject as if she hadn't just said something deeply unsettling. That was the moment I felt it shift from quiet judgment to something darker. After that dinner, things began happening behind our backs. At first I didn't know. Pette was careful. She never said anything in front of me or Arlo. Instead, she whispered to extended family members, planting ideas instead of accusations. She told them I got pregnant on purpose. She said women like me used babies as insurance policies. She said Arlo was too trusting to see what was really happening. She framed it as concern, but it was poison all the same. I found out by accident at my own baby shower. One of Arlo's cousins made a comment about how everything worked out nicely, then froze when she saw my face. She thought I already knew. She thought Arlo had confronted his mother. That's when I realized Pette had been telling people I trapped her son with a baby. That night, I told Arlo everything. He was furious in a way I'd never seen before. He called his mother immediately and demanded an explanation. Pette denied it all. She cried. She said people misunderstood her. She said she was being attacked unfairly. By the end of the call, somehow, Arlo was apologizing for upsetting her. I remember sitting there in silence, realizing she didn't just dislike me. She was willing to lie about me to protect her image of her son. That realization hurt more than any insult ever could. I was pregnant, emotional, and exhausted, but I still tried to believe it would stop. I told myself once the baby arrived, once she saw her grandchild, everything would change. I had no idea that things were only just beginning. By the time my pregnancy became visible, the damage had already been done. I just didn't know how deep it went yet. I was still clinging to the belief that once the baby arrived, once there was something real and undeniable in front of everyone, the rumors would stop. I thought reality would correct the lies on its own. I didn't understand yet that Pette wasn't interested in the truth. She was interested in control. Our daughter was born in the spring, and from the very first moment she looked exactly like Arlo. Same nose, same chin, same unusual eye color that ran in his family. Even the nurses commented on it. One of them laughed and said she'd seen a lot of newborns, but this one didn't even try to pretend she wasn't her father's twin. Doctors joked that I did all the work and Arlo got the copy. I felt proud hearing that. Not just because she was beautiful, but because it felt like proof. Like something solid in a situation that had already begun to feel unstable. When Pette came to the hospital, she barely held the baby. She took her for less than a minute before handing her back and saying she looked small. She said she didn't see Arlo in her at all. She said sometimes babies change as they grow. Her words were calm, almost casual, but they landed like stones. I looked around the room, confused, because everyone else could see what she was denying so easily. It felt intentional, like she was laying groundwork. Over the next few weeks, I started hearing things. Not directly from Pette, of course. From cousins. From aunts. From people who suddenly spoke to me a little more carefully, a little more awkwardly. Someone asked if the baby had Arlo's blood type yet. Someone else joked about how newborns all look alike anyway. At first, I brushed it off as ignorance. Then it happened too often to ignore. Arlo found out before I did. His cousin pulled him aside at a family gathering and asked if he was sure he didn't want to get a paternity test just to be safe. He came home that night furious and confused, demanding to know why anyone would even suggest something like that. When I told him what I'd been sensing for weeks, everything clicked. His mother had been talking. Again. This time, she didn't deny it when he confronted her. She said she had concerns. She said she was just being a protective mother. She said the baby didn't look like him, no matter what anyone else claimed. She said if I had nothing to hide, I shouldn't be offended by a test. The words were so calculated, so carefully framed to make me sound unreasonable for being hurt, that I felt sick listening to them secondhand. Arlo looked at his mother, then looked at our daughter sleeping peacefully in my arms. Our daughter, who had his face so clearly it almost felt cruel to question it. He told his mother that if she needed proof, then she didn't trust him at all. He told her that demanding a test wasn't about reassurance. It was about refusing to accept reality. He told her she cared more about being right than about having a relationship with her granddaughter. That was the first time I heard him speak to her without softening his words. Pette accused him of choosing me over his own mother. She said she was being pushed out. She said I was turning him against her. Arlo told her he was choosing his wife and child over someone who couldn't treat them with basic respect. He told her she wasn't welcome in our home until she apologized sincerely and stopped spreading lies about me. She stormed out. I expected the silence afterward to feel tense. Instead, it felt like relief. Our home became quieter, lighter. Without her presence, I stopped feeling like I was constantly being evaluated. We settled into life as new parents, learning our daughter's rhythms, laughing at how fascinated she was by her own hands. Arlo would come home from work and she'd kick her legs when she heard his voice. We spent evenings on the floor together, exhausted but happy. But the peace didn't last. Pette didn't apologize. She didn't reflect. She repositioned herself. She told extended family members that she was being punished for caring. She cried about being kept away from her only grandchild. She never mentioned the accusations. She never mentioned the paternity demands. She let people assume we were being cruel and unreasonable, and people believed her. I felt it in the way conversations stopped when I walked into rooms. I felt it in the sideways glances and awkward silences. Even though Arlo stood by me without hesitation, I still carried the weight of being judged. I started questioning myself, wondering if I was being too sensitive, wondering if standing my ground made me the problem. One morning, my mother came over and found me sitting on the living room floor, crying quietly while my daughter played nearby. I told her I was tired of being the villain in a story I didn't write. I told her I did nothing wrong, yet I was paying for lies someone else chose to tell. She held me and reminded me that truth doesn't disappear just because people refuse to see it. But even her reassurance couldn't erase how deeply it hurt. That was when I realized something important. Cutting Pette off didn't erase the damage she'd done. The lies were still out there, shaping how people saw me. And as long as I stayed silent, she controlled the narrative. I didn't know it yet. But that silence was about to end. The silence after Pette stormed out of our lives wasn't peaceful at first. It felt fragile, like it could crack at any moment. Arlo tried to shield me from the worst of it, but I could still feel the aftershocks of what she'd done. Her words had traveled farther than she had. They lingered in conversations I wasn't part of. in opinions people formed without ever asking me a single question. Even when she wasn't physically present, she still had influence. For a while, Arlo and I focused entirely on our daughter. Becoming parents changed our sense of time. Days blurred together in a cycle of feedings, naps, and sleepless nights. Watching our daughter grow distracted me from everything else. She had Arlo's eyes, his expressions, even the way she furrowed her brow when she was confused. Every milestone felt like quiet proof that the accusations never made sense to begin with. But proof doesn't matter when people have already chosen what they want to believe. The rumors didn't stop just because we stopped attending family gatherings. They simply changed shape. Instead of direct accusations, they became questions. Instead of statements, they became concern. Someone asked Arlo if everything was okay between us. Someone else mentioned how hard it must be for Pette not to see her grandchild. No one ever mentioned the lies. No one acknowledged the harm. It was as if everyone collectively decided to focus on her pain and forget the reason it existed. That imbalance wore me down. One afternoon, my mother came over to help while Arlo was at work. She brought groceries, and that familiar determined look she gets when she's decided someone needs care whether they ask for it or not. She cooked while I fed the baby, then shooed me toward the shower while she cleaned up. When I came back into the living room, she was sitting on the floor doing tummy time with my daughter, making exaggerated, encouraging noises that made the baby kick her legs excitedly. I sat down beside them and watched for a minute, feeling something tight and heavy in my chest. My mother looked over at me and immediately knew something was wrong. She asked how I was really doing. Not the polite answer. Not the version I gave everyone else. The truth. Something about the way she said it cracked whatever I'd been holding together. I started crying right there on the floor. Ugly, uncontrollable sobs. I told her I was exhausted from being judged. From feeling like I had to constantly prove my integrity. From knowing that no matter how good of a mother I was, some people would always believe Pette's version of events. She held me and told me something I didn't realize I needed to hear. She said lies don't stop being lies just because they're repeated. She said anyone who chose to believe accusations over obvious evidence wasn't someone whose opinion should matter to me. She reminded me that my daughter would grow up knowing who stood by her and who didn't. That conversation didn't fix everything, but it grounded me. Later that same day, Arlo got a phone call that changed everything again. It was his cousin Fletcher, calling to warn us. Pette hadn't stopped talking. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't reflecting. She was repositioning herself as the victim. She was telling people we were cruel for keeping her grandchild away. She was crying about how her son had chosen his wife over his own mother. She carefully avoided mentioning the accusations, the cheating rumors, the paternity demands. She painted herself as heartbroken and misunderstood, and people were sympathizing. Arlo paced the living room while he was on the phone, his jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists. When he hung up, he looked angrier than I'd seen him in weeks. He said his mother still didn't get it. She still believed she was the one who'd been wronged. She thought time and guilt would force us to back down. Watching him struggle with that realization hurt almost as much as what she'd done to me. He wasn't just losing trust in his mother. He was grieving the relationship he thought they had. That's when I realized we'd been on defense this entire time. We were constantly reacting to whatever Pette did next. We were letting her control the narrative even when she wasn't present. And I was tired of feeling powerless in my own life. I told Arlo we needed to stop letting her speak for us. He stopped pacing and looked at me, surprised. I said we should tell people the truth, not a softened version, not something designed to keep the peace. The full truth. What she said. What she implied. What she demanded. I said if people were going to judge me anyway, they might as well do it with all the information. Arlo didn't answer right away. He sat down and stared at the floor for a long moment. Then he nodded. He pulled out his phone and opened the family group chat. He typed for a long time, deleting and rewriting, choosing his words carefully. When he finally showed me what he'd written, my hands were shaking. The message explained exactly why we'd set boundaries with his mother. It detailed her accusations about me trapping him with a baby. It described the cheating rumors. It explained the paternity test demand despite obvious resemblance. It made it clear that this situation wasn't about punishment or control, but about accountability. Before either of us could second-guess it, he hit send. The responses came quickly. Some people expressed support and said they suspected something was off. Others urged forgiveness, saying families should stick together no matter what. A few admitted they had no idea things were that bad. Then Arlo's brother responded. He said we were being dramatic. He said Pette was just concerned. He said mothers had a right to protect their sons. Arlo's response was immediate and firm. He said accusing his wife of infidelity and questioning his child's paternity wasn't concern. It was character assassination. He said minimizing that behavior was exactly why distance was necessary. Then he muted the chat and set his phone down. For the first time since all of this started, I felt like I could breathe. The truth was finally out there. People could choose what to believe, but Pette no longer controlled the story alone. I didn't know how this would end, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done being silent, and that silence breaking was about to change everything. Once the truth was out, I expected things to calm down. I thought people would read Arlo's message, connect the dots, and quietly adjust their opinions. Some did, others didn't. What I didn't expect was how heavy the aftermath would feel. Clearing your name doesn't immediately erase the damage done by lies. It just exposes how many people were comfortable believing them in the first place. For a few days after Arlo sent that message, my phone stayed quiet. No texts, no calls. I didn't know whether people were processing what they'd read or just avoiding the discomfort of acknowledging it. The silence made me anxious. I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering if we'd said too much or not enough. I wondered who believed us and who quietly sided with Pette anyway. I hated that part the most, the not knowing. Then the messages started coming in. Some were supportive. A few cousins apologized for repeating things they'd heard without checking with us first. One aunt admitted she always thought the accusations sounded strange but didn't want to get involved. Others sent vague messages about hoping everyone could heal and move forward, carefully avoiding any mention of accountability. A handful said nothing at all. Their silence spoke louder than words. What surprised me most was how emotionally exhausting it was to read even the supportive messages. Each apology forced me to relive what I'd been accused of. Each explanation reopened the wound. I realized I wasn't obligated to comfort people for believing lies about me, even if they now felt bad. So I stopped responding to most of them. I needed to protect what little energy I had left. A week later, I took our daughter to her routine pediatric appointment. It was one of those ordinary days that felt strangely heavy because everything else in my life felt uncertain. I sat in the waiting room, bouncing her gently on my knee, trying to distract her with the colorful fish painted on the wall. That's when I heard my name. I looked up and saw one of Arlo's distant cousins standing near the check-in desk. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She congratulated me on the baby and asked how old she was now. Her tone was polite, but there was something careful about it, like she didn't know where she stood with me. I recognized that hesitation immediately. She'd heard the rumors. She just didn't know what to believe anymore. Something in me snapped. Not angrily. Quietly. Instead of shrinking back or keeping things surface level, I pulled out my phone. I opened my photo gallery and stepped closer to her. I showed her recent pictures of my daughter. Clear photos. Close-ups. Smiling, alert, unmistakably Arlo's child. I didn't say anything at first. I just let her look. Her reaction was immediate. Her eyes widened. She looked from the photos to my daughter in my arms and back again. She laughed awkwardly and said she hadn't realized how strong the resemblance was. She apologized for being strange and admitted she'd heard some things but could see now that they weren't true. She asked to see more pictures, and I showed her several. Each one made her expression shift further from doubt to embarrassment. When she walked away, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. That evening, I told Arlo what happened. I explained how easy it was for doubt to disappear once people actually saw the evidence. He listened carefully, then suggested something that felt obvious in hindsight. He said we should stop letting Pette's words travel further than the truth. He said we should share more photos, openly, without commentary. Let reality speak for itself. We spent that night going through our camera roll together. We chose pictures that showed our daughter clearly. Her face, her expressions, her eye color. Photos where the resemblance to Arlo was impossible to deny. We created a shared album and sent it to the extended family with a simple message about wanting to share her first few months of life. The response was overwhelming. Within minutes, people started commenting. They pointed out identical features. Someone shared an old baby photo of Arlo side by side with one of our daughter, and the resemblance was undeniable. Messages poured in saying how obvious it was. Apologies followed. Some people admitted they should never have believed otherwise. The album spread beyond the original group. Cousins showed it to their parents. Aunts forwarded it to uncles. For the first time, Pette's narrative collapsed under its own weight. The next day, Arlo got a call from his uncle. He said Pette had seen the photos and completely broken down. She was crying uncontrollably. She couldn't stop looking at them. She kept saying she'd been wrong. She was begging for another chance. Hearing that didn't bring me satisfaction the way I thought it might. Instead, I felt conflicted. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired. Tears didn't undo months of lies. Regret didn't automatically equal accountability. I needed more than emotion. I needed acknowledgement of what she'd actually done. 2 days later, my phone rang with an unknown number. I answered without thinking. It was Pette. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. She kept saying she was sorry. She said she realized how wrong she'd been after seeing the photos. She said she needed another chance. She said she missed her granddaughter. I listened, but something felt off. Her words were vague. She talked about how devastated she felt, about what she'd lost, about how much pain she was in. She didn't say what she'd done. She didn't say my name. She didn't acknowledge the accusations or the damage to my reputation. I told her I couldn't have that conversation right now. I said crying wasn't the same as taking responsibility. I said if she wanted forgiveness, she needed to show real accountability, not just emotion. She begged me not to hang up. I did anyway. My hands were shaking when I set the phone down. When Arlo came home and I told him what happened, his reaction was immediate. He called his father and told him that his mother contacting me directly wasn't appropriate. He made it clear that any communication needed to go through him and that guilt-driven breakdowns weren't going to fix what she'd done. His father defended Pette, saying she was suffering. Arlo told him that suffering didn't erase harm. Then, he ended the call. That night, Arlo and I sat together in silence after our daughter went to sleep. The truth was finally visible to everyone. Pette had lost control of the story. But what came next mattered more than anything else. Because now, the question wasn't whether she was sorry. It was whether she was capable of change. After Pette's breakdown, I expected things to move quickly. Apologies often demand urgency, as if regret should immediately be rewarded with forgiveness. But days passed, then a full week, and nothing happened. No real apology, no acknowledgement of the specific lies she'd told. Just silence. And in that silence, I started to understand something important. Being emotional about consequences is not the same thing as being sorry for actions. Arlo struggled during that time more than he let on. I could see it in the way he held our daughter longer than usual, in the way his shoulders stayed tense, even when he tried to relax. Losing trust in a parent isn't loud. It's quiet and disorienting. You don't just grieve the relationship you have. You grieve the relationship you thought you had. I made sure he knew I wasn't trying to keep him from his mother. I was trying to protect myself and our child from someone who had proven she was willing to destroy my reputation to maintain control. We talked a lot about what accountability would actually look like. Not vague apologies, not tears. Specific acknowledgement. Taking responsibility publicly, not just privately. Correcting the lies she spread with the same people she'd poisoned against me. Changed behavior over time. We wrote our expectations down, not because we wanted to be cold, but because we needed clarity. Boundaries only work when they're clear. Then the letter arrived. I recognized Pette's handwriting immediately. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside were 3 pages written carefully, deliberately. She didn't minimize what she'd done. She named it. She admitted she told people I trapped her son. She admitted she suggested I cheated. She admitted she pushed the idea of a paternity test even when the resemblance was obvious. She wrote that she acted out of jealousy, control, and fear of losing her place in her son's life. She said she'd been wrong about me from the beginning. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She said she understood if she never received it. I read the letter 3 times. Words are easy. Anyone can write the right things once they know what they're supposed to say. What mattered was what came next. Arlo agreed. He said the letter was the most accountable thing he'd ever seen his mother do, but he didn't want to rush. Neither did I. Arlo called his mother that night, while I sat beside him. He thanked her for the letter. He told her rebuilding trust would take time. He told her she needed to actively correct the lies she spread. She agreed without arguing. That surprised both of us. She asked if she could send a small gift for our daughter. I hesitated, then said yes. A week later, a package arrived. Inside was a handmade baby blanket and a children's book. No dramatic note. No pressure. Just a simple message saying she hoped our daughter liked it. It didn't erase the past, but it showed effort. And effort matters. Over the following weeks, we heard through other family members that Pette was correcting the record. She was telling people she'd been wrong. She was admitting she'd lied. She wasn't defending herself. She wasn't shifting blame. She was uncomfortable, and she stayed that way. That's how I knew something was different. Real accountability doesn't rush to be comfortable again. Eventually, we agreed to a supervised meeting at a public park. Neutral ground. Easy exit. Clear boundaries. I barely slept the night before. I was braced for disappointment. For manipulation. For subtle digs disguised as concern. When I saw her standing by the fountain, she looked smaller than I remembered. Older. She didn't approach until we did. She waited. She knelt by the stroller instead of reaching for it. She didn't touch our daughter without permission. She acknowledged the resemblance without hesitation. She apologized directly to me by name for what she'd done. Not once did she excuse herself. Not once did she make it about her pain. When Arlo asked why she'd done it, she admitted she was afraid of losing control and ashamed of it. She didn't expect forgiveness. She said that clearly. We stayed for 40 minutes. The entire time, she respected every boundary. When we left, she didn't ask for more. She thanked us for giving her the chance. That mattered. Rebuilding trust didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, in consistent behavior. Supervised visits. Respectful distance. No commentary on my parenting. No gossip. No pressure. Each time she showed up as the version of herself she claimed she was trying to become, I allowed a little more space. Not because I owed her forgiveness, but because change deserves acknowledgement when it's real. Our marriage grew stronger through all of this. Arlo never wavered in choosing his wife and daughter. He never asked me to accept less than I was comfortable with. We learned that boundaries don't break families. They reveal which relationships are worth keeping. Now when I look at my daughter sleeping peacefully, I don't think about accusations or lies anymore. I think about what she'll grow up knowing. That her parents protected her. That her mother didn't shrink herself to keep others comfortable. That love doesn't mean tolerating cruelty. Pette didn't get another chance because she cried. She got one because she took responsibility, respected boundaries, and proved through actions that she understood what she'd done. And that difference changed everything.